Hey guys, hope everyone is doing well. I have a whole lot of Israel updates that I wanted to go ahead and bring to you, some that are incredibly significant and we cannot lose sight of, including war drums beating louder and louder for us to go to war with Iran, both from Israeli politicians pushing us in that direction and our own politicians. You won't be surprised, Lindsey Graham, John Bolton, etc. We also have South Africa officially instituting proceedings against Israel for the crime of genocide. I want to spend a bit of time on that, why it's significant, what is the case that they are making. We have Israel saying they regret the use of a particular munition in attacking a refugee camp. They don't regret striking the refugee camp, just the particular munition that they used in what has been one of the deadliest attacks on the Gaza Strip since the beginning of their assault post October 7th. We have the U.S. skipping congressional review to go ahead and sell additional munitions to Israel. This is significant in a number of ways. So I want to break that down for you. We've got another alleged Biden versus Bibi fight. Allegedly a difficult phone conversation. So I'll break that down for you. What was it supposedly about and what happened there? What does it mean? This war has apparently also unleashed a drug-resistant super fungus that is attacking Israeli soldiers and undoubtedly Palestinians as well. So important to keep our eye on that. And ethnic cleansing being mainstreamed by U.S. politicians, none other than our great friend, that beacon of moderate politics, Nikki Haley herself. So I'll show you those comments too. But I wanted to go ahead and start with war drums beating for us to get directly in a conflict with Iran. Now, this is incredible on a number of levels. First of all, horrifying that anyone is suggesting or excited about the possibility of escalating this conflict into a regional conflagration, into a war directly between the US and Israel and Iran. But in addition, so this is Naftali Bennett. He is a former prime minister of Israel. Just a year or so ago, he was prime minister of Israel. And he published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying the U.S. and Israel need to take on Iran directly, make the Ayatollahs pay for sowing chaos through their Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthi proxies. Here he is tweeting this out. Iran is a terror octopus. Its arms, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are sowing chaos and terror across the world. It's time for the U.S. and its allies to target its head, Tehran, and bring down its regime. Now, think if any other foreign politician published an op-ed in a Western media outlet, in one of the top Western media outlets, calling for us to send our sons and daughters into war, everyone would be freaking out about this. Even if it was, the Ukrainian Zelensky saying we should get directly involved and boots on the ground in a war with Russia, people would rightly be freaking out. But here, for some reason, since it's Israel, just fine and dandy for their former prime minister, very recently former prime minister, to write in the pages of the Wall Street Journal that, it's time for us to go to war with Iran. Let me read you a little bit of what he says here. He says, there are many ways to weaken Iran, empower domestic opposition, ensure internet continuity during riots against the regime, strengthen its enemies, increase sanctions and economic pressures. But Israel can't and shouldn't do this alone. The U.S. should be leading the effort. So regime change effort that he's saying here now, he's saying, it doesn't have to go to all out war. He floats this sort of like wish list of what right-wing hawks in Israel and here in America too, as I'm about to show you, want us to be doing to Iran, including things like increasing sanctions. I mean, we're already sanctioning the hell out of Iran, and how has that worked out for us in terms of our relationship? It's preposterous. But also to float all of these actions aimed directly at regime change within Iran and think that includes no risk whatsoever, that you can just do these things without any cost or consequence. He can't be this stupid. There's no way that he's this stupid. He concludes by saying the U.S. and Israel must set the clear goal of bringing down Iran's evil regime. Not only is this possible, it is vital for the safety and security of the Middle East and the entire civilized world. So now you'll recall at the beginning of, right after the horrors of October 7th, there was this report originally in the Wall Street Journal claiming that Iran was directly involved in the October 7th attacks. This was always very questionable based on really shoddy sourcing. And immediately, both the US and Israeli intelligence shot this report down and said, look, Iran provides support to Hamas, but they were actually caught off guard. They were actually surprised by the October 7th attacks. They were not directly involved in planning it. And so early on in the conflict, people like John Bolton and others, right-wing, Republican politicians here in the US, started to build this case for war with Iran, and they haven't really stopped. But once that initial report got kind of shot down, there was a little bit of, you heard a little bit less of, hey, now's the time we go after Iran. Because again, they are not directly implicated in the October 7th attacks. But now we're coming back around to, as we're seeing what the Houthis are doing with regard to the Red Sea, we're coming back around to this incredibly hawkish case for direct war and conflict with Iran. The next example I'll show you, again, you won't be surprised by this because Lindsey Graham is always looking for an excuse to call for war with Iran, it seems, but he says the U.S. should hit an Iranian base and blow it off the map. Let me read you this from Newsweek. Senator Lindsey Graham is urging the Biden administration to blow parts of Iran off the map. The South Carolina Republican said he told Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin not to show weakness and make clear what the U.S. red lines for a retaliatory attack are. Without Iran, there are no Houthis, Graham told Fox News on Wednesday. The Houthis are completely backed by Iran. I have been saying for 6 months now, hit Iran. They have oil fields out in the open. They have the Revolutionary Guard headquarters you can see from space. Blow it off the map. He continued, if you really want to protect American soldiers, make it real to the Ayatollah that if you attack a soldier through a proxy, we are coming after you. So directly calling to blow the Revolutionary Guard headquarters off the map. Off the map. It's Lindsey Graham. I've got one more for you here. Shouldn't be left out. John Bolton, again, one of these people who, I guess it's just a ordinary day of the week for him to call for direct war with Iran. He says the West may now have no option but to attack Iran. Tehran will only accept it has miscalculated if it faces significant costs for its recent acts of aggression. And Caitlin Johnstone here opining, it's actually almost cute at this point. He just keeps making up excuses to get the one thing he desperately wants. Like, looks like we'll have to do the thing I've always wanted to do. He's like a cartoon breakfast cereal mascot, always making new schemes to grab a bowl, which is fairly well said. But for me, it highlights just what a dangerous and precarious situation that we find ourselves in, with risks of escalation across the board. The fact that we have so many service members still in the region means that there are targets and possibilities of dangerous escalation. The fact that you have this domestic push now coupled with an Israeli push for direct conflict with Iran. This is not something to play around with. This is not something to downplay. This is a risk we have to take incredibly, incredibly seriously because, with regard to Biden, who is mentally ailing and who has proven himself to basically do whatever Israel wants him to do, I don't think you can take any possibility off the table at this point. But, I can't move on to the next piece without just saying how sick it is to me to hear these people just so casual in calling for, directly escalatory attacks, calling for blowing the Revolutionary Guard headquarters off the map as if that wouldn't create the conditions for potential direct war. I guess they're just so used to thinking of the globe as like some chessboard that they can just move pieces around on. They don't even consider the human beings' lives who would be put at risk, because I guess it wouldn't be them, it wouldn't be their family, it wouldn't be the people in their like elite bubble circles. And so it's just done so incredibly casually. And I, even though it's characters like Lindsey Graham and John Bolton who do this all the time, I still continue to find it, and I think you should still continue to find it incredibly shocking and incredibly disturbing. All right, let's go ahead and move on to this next piece, which I mentioned before, which is that South Africa has now officially instituted proceedings with the International Court of Justice against Israel for the crime of genocide. You have Jeremy Scahill here, a fantastic reporter, co-founder of The Intercept, who says this is a significant move, particularly because the action is being brought by South Africa, a nation that fought for its own liberation against an apartheid regime, supported for decades by the U.S. I want to read to you a little bit of their letter and what they have to say here. They say South Africa today filed an application instituting proceedings against Israel before the International Court of Justice, the principal judicial organ of the UN, concerning alleged violations by Israel of its obligations under the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, the quote, Genocide Convention, in relation to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. According to this application, acts and omissions by Israel are genocidal in character, as they are committed with the requisite specific intent to destroy Palestinians in Gaza as part of the broader Palestinian national racial and ethnical group, and that the conduct of Israel through the state organs, state agents, and other persons and entities acting on its instructions or under the direction, control, or influence in relation to Palestinians in Gaza is in violation of its obligations under the Genocide Convention. I also want to share with you just a bit of the actual case that they filed here. And it's like, 80 some pages long. So obviously I'm not going to read all of it. But in the specific language about this, about the Genocide Convention and what it entails, one of the most difficult to prove components is the idea of intent. So you have to see the acts on the ground, which obviously, we see in this mass bombing campaign, targeting civilians, targeting civilian infrastructure, targeting, anyone who calls themselves a Palestinian, overwhelmingly in Gaza, but also targeting in the West Bank as well. You have to have the capability to actually effectuate genocide. And then you have to have this component of intent. And as I said, this is typically, according to people who study this, and I would recommend you go listen to Ryan and Emily did a fantastic interview with a scholar who's saying this is, textbook case of genocide. Typically, the intent piece is difficult to establish because usually politicians and media figures, etc., military officials aren't running around saying, hey, guys, I'm doing a genocide. What do you think? But in this particular case, they have so many examples of Israeli officials up to and including Benjamin Netanyahu, saying very explicitly what they're up to here. And so I wanted to show you a little bit of that part of the report. It starts on page 59 under this subheading, Expressions of Genocidal Intent Against the Palestinian People by Israeli State Officials and Others. They cite here comments from Netanyahu. They talk about how in a televised address, he promised to, quote, operate forcefully everywhere. He confirmed, we are striking our enemies with unprecedented might. He said when Israeli airstrikes had already killed over 2,670 Palestinians, including 724 children. He said that Israeli soldiers understand the scope of the mission and stand ready to defeat the bloodthirsty monsters who have risen against Israel to destroy us. In a formal address, you may recall this, he described the situation as a struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness, between humanity and the law of the jungle, a dehumanizing theme to which he returned on various occasions, they write, including on November 3rd in a letter to Israeli soldiers and officers published on X. The letter asserted that this is the war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. We will not let up on our mission until the light overcomes the darkness. The good will defeat the extreme evil that threatens us and the entire world. He returned to the theme in his Christmas message, stating, we are facing monsters who murder children in front of their parents. This is a battle not only of Israel against these barbarians, it's a battle of civilization against barbarism. On October 28th, as Israeli forces prepared their land invasion of Gaza, he invoked the biblical story of the total destruction of Amalek by the Israelites, stating, you must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible, and we do remember. He again referred to Amalek in a letter on November 3rd, saying the relevant biblical passage reads as follows. Now go attack Amalek and prescribe all that belongs to him. Spare no one, but kill alike men and women, infants and sucklings, oxen and sheep, camels and asses. They go on through the list. I won't give you all of these details. Some of these comments you'll remember. Isaac Herzog, One of the comments they cite here is his discussion of how there are no innocent Palestinians in Gaza. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant saying they're imposing a complete siege, saying we're fighting human animals and are acting accordingly. Israeli Minister for National Security, Israeli Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, Israeli Minister of Finance, saying we need to deal a blow that hasn't been seen in 50 years and take down Gaza. The Israeli Minister of Heritage, the Israeli Minister of Agriculture, the Deputy Speaker of the Knesset and member of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee. You've got, in addition, you've got Israeli Army officials, advisors, and spokespersons, Israeli Army Coordinator of Government Activities, Israeli Army Reservist Major General, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of establishing intent, which again is oftentimes the most difficult part of proving that, the crimes are grave enough to meet what is intended to be a high bar of the Genocide Convention. Their own words make it quite clear how they are viewing this conflict, what their goals are, and what they're up to. So that's a key part of the case that they are making here to the International Court of Justice. I think it's also important. South Africa's foreign minister was discussing this case against Israel, and she had some very powerful words that I wanted to share with you about U.S. hypocrisy and Western hypocrisy with regards to the view of Israel and the acts they're committing in Gaza versus the way, and this is something we've highlighted on the show, versus the way that they discuss Russian war crimes against Ukraine, and how, this hypocrisy, it really renders international law completely meaningless. So let's listen to what South Africa's foreign minister has to say.
I think this notion of international rules is very comfortable for some people to use when it suits them, but they don't believe in international rules when it doesn't suit them, because they don't apply international rules or law equally in all circumstances. So you can't say because Ukraine has been invaded that suddenly sovereignty is important, but it was never important for Palestine. It's very peculiar. If you believe in international law truly, then wherever sovereignty is infringed, it must apply. And this is the point we've been making, that we use the framework of international law unequally, depending on who is affected. And we are arguing that that must change. And one of the interesting changes that has occurred is the sudden movement, because Russia has invaded Ukraine, that we say, okay, let's not allow the Security Council to just have the veto and let it pass. We take it to the General Assembly. When some of us had been calling for the General Assembly to have a greater say, we never enjoyed support. But suddenly today, see, that's where international law begins to mean nothing. Because for some, we see it as a cheating, and for others, we see it as a benefit. So our argument is, let's revise the international multilateral system to ensure that we observe that post-1948 has arrived.
Post-1948 has arrived. I think very powerful words there, very compelling, very difficult to deny the level of hypocrisy. In fact, there was a new Russian attack, likely war crime, bombing against residential, I believe is a high-rise apartment building in Ukraine. U.S. officials, Tony Blinken, jumping on Twitter, no problem calling that out as the horror that it was. But then when it's Israel that has literally destroyed vast majority of Gaza, including apartment buildings, including there's actually a new Wall Street Journal analysis. I believe 70% of homes, huge percentage of homes have been destroyed. Schools, mosques, churches, farmland, water infrastructure, you name it, it's been destroyed. And virtual silence. You occasionally get this little like, oh, maybe you should do a little bit better, or a leak to the press of, we're really worried about the civilians, and oh, they need to stop. Biden even said they're, indiscriminate bombing. I mean, he described it as indiscriminate bombing. That is a war crime. And yet there is none of the concern. There's certainly no repercussions. There's nothing but just greenlighting more and more and more, which actually, let me go ahead and show you what the latest is in that regard. We've got the Biden administration once again bypassing Congress on an emergency weapon sale to Israel. So they are bypassing the normal procedure to allow for congressional approval and just going ahead and greenlighting this sale, which, given the context, given the fact, again, you even have Biden describing what Israel is doing as indiscriminate bombing. You have, this genocide allegations being presented at the International Court of Justice. I mean, you have so much documented at this point. This is directly aiding and abetting those war crimes. So let me read you a little bit of the article. They say, for the second time this month, the Biden administration is bypassing Congress to approve an emergency weapons sale to Israel as Israel continues to prosecute its war against Hamas and Gaza under increasing international criticism. State Department said Friday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken had told Congress that he made a second emergency determination covering a $147.5 million sale for equipment, including fuses, charges, and primers that is needed to make the 155 millimeter shells that Israel has already purchased function. Given the urgency of Israel's defensive needs, the secretary notified Congress he had exercised his delegated authority to determine an emergency existed, necessitating the immediate approval of the transfer. So I looked up the significance of these particular munitions. So each round is about 2 feet long, weighs about 100 pounds, is, as the name indicates, about 155 millimeters or 6.1 inches in diameter. They're used in howitzer systems, which are towed large guns that are identified by the range of the angle of fire that their barrels can be set to, can be configured in many ways, can be packed with highly explosive material, use precision-guided systems, pierce armor, or produce high fragmentation. This is, again, according to the AP. And these are highly sought-after munitions. There are a few things that are really important to note here. As I mentioned before, just the green lighting of this, the bypassing of normal procedures, shows you how all in the Biden administration continues to be on Israel's assault on Gaza. Any sort of words of concern notwithstanding, that's number one. Number two, these are exactly the munitions that, and Ryan Grimm is pointing this out on Twitter, Ukraine is desperate for. So it also shows you, the pecking order in terms of U.S. support and priorities. Ukraine has definitely fallen to the back burner. We'll cover this next week when we're back doing normal shows. You now have it being openly talked about. Hey, Ukraine may have to give up some territory, something that was absolutely off the table to even say up until very, very recently. And so they're, expediting this massive sale of these, very large munitions to Israel and circumventing the normal process in order to make sure Israel has absolutely everything they need to continue what Joe Biden himself has described as an indiscriminate bombing campaign in Gaza. And speaking of which, let's discuss, there was recently, I brought you some of these details previously, a huge attack on a large refugee camp. It killed, reports are killed hundreds, including, overwhelmingly civilians, as per usual, many women and children. And the Israelis are now expressing regret, not over the attack itself, but this is an Israeli government spokesperson on Sky News saying they regret that a wrong munition was used in this attack. Let's take a listen.
Given that we have heard from the IDF about what took place at the Magazi refugee camp, I wonder if we might focus the majority of our time on that. What is your understanding as to what took place there on Christmas Eve?
My understanding is, as a military spokesperson has told Israeli television, an incorrect munition was used in that strike. We, of course, do our best to be targeted and precise and to target the Hamas terrorists and do everything to get civilians out of harm's way. And it appears that in this mistake, in war, a mistake was made, and we are learning lessons.
Mistake was made. They're learning lessons. They're doing their best, guys. And we are now, I have actually entered one of what appears to be the deadliest phases of this assault on Gaza. This comes after many U.S. supposed concerns have been expressed. And remember all those reports about how the U.S. officials who flew to Tel Aviv were telling Netanyahu, like, the attacks on the south can't be like what you did in the north, but none of that has been heeded. If anything, it's more deadly, which makes sense because obviously the north is completely uninhabitable, utterly destroyed. There's barely anything left standing. Attacks on key parts of civilian life, including hospitals, Al-Shifa being sort of like the center of those attacks. There are very few hospitals that are even continuing to operate anywhere in the Gaza Strip, but the north is utterly destroyed. And almost everybody in the Palestinian Gaza population has now moved to the south. So you have people even more densely packed in, even more close quarters. And the Israeli government and the IDF have told them, there's this one place where you can go to be safer. Well, they still are bombing those places where they claim to tell the population that they can move to be safe. As the UN has said, and as many analyses, including from Western media outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and the New York Times have said, there is nowhere safe in the Gaza Strip. And yet we have yet another of these reports of how concerned Biden is and how he's really, behind the scenes pushing back on Bibi, and they're doing their best out there. This is from Axios, from reporter Barak Ravid. Scoop: Biden in frustrating call told Bibi to solve Palestinian tax revenue issue. So this has to do with the West Bank, which is run in part by the Palestinian Authority. The taxes that are directly owed to the Palestinian Authority, Israel has been withholding. And this has been a particular project of extremist finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, who doesn't want any of this money to go to the PA. Well, they're already in a financial crisis, and which has been, really exacerbated by the fact that Palestinians who used to be able in the West Bank to go and work in Israel as day laborers, etc., they have been blocked from doing that. So there's been a huge drop in revenue, and they're really struggling. And now Israel is completely withholding the tax revenue that they are owed in order to finance, paying for their employees and their bureaucracy and basic services and security services, etc. So that's the context of this alleged conversation that happened. Let me read you this report. They say President Biden held a difficult conversation with Netanyahu over Israel's decision to withhold part of the tax revenue it collects for the PA, according to two U.S. and Israeli officials. The big picture, U.S. officials said this part of last Saturday's call between the two leaders was one of the most difficult and frustrating conversations Biden has had with Netanyahu since the beginning of the war, sign of growing tensions between Biden and Netanyahu. I'll believe it when I see it. The tax revenues Israel collects for the PA under an agreement between the parties are a major source of income for the PA, which is already in a financial crisis. And as I mentioned, Israel's far-right ultranationalist finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, in October decided to suspend the transfer of all of the tax revenue funds after the Hamas terrorist attack. Hamas does not run the West Bank, so why is the PA being targeted for something they had absolutely nothing to do with? So they say behind the scenes, Saturday's 45-minute call focused on the next phase of Israel's ground operation, but towards the end of the call, Biden raised his concerns about the withheld Palestinian tax revenues. According to the officials, Biden asked Netanyahu to accept a proposal that the Israeli prime minister had raised himself several weeks ago to transfer the withheld tax revenues to Norway for safekeeping until an arrangement can be found. And the PA had agreed to that. Netanyahu had floated it previously, and now reportedly he backtracked on that. And at the end of the call, they say after a few minutes of discussion, Biden told Netanyahu he expects him to solve this issue, added that this conversation is over, and ended the call, the U.S. official and source with knowledge of the call said. So supposedly tensions over this. I mean, it is noteworthy to me that this would be the thing that Biden would really get most irritated and upset over. I mean, listen, I'm not saying it's not an important issue. I'm not saying it's like completely unjust that this is being withheld from the PA. Of causing additional suffering in the West Bank. And it's easy to lose sight of what's going on the West Bank because of what's going on in Gaza is so horrific, but violence has dramatically escalated there. So it's not that it's not important, but you had this whole conversation about the next phase of the quote unquote ground operation, and that all went fine and dandy. And the thing that you're getting completely hung up on is the tax revenue part. What about the human beings who are being massacred on a daily basis? What about this attack on the refugee camp that just, slaughtered hundreds of civilians? What about the attacks on the hospital that they just blatantly lied about the extent of Hamas use and any sort of connection to Hamas command and control center? No, none of that was the part that really got Biden upset. It was the tax revenue, which again, not saying it's not important, but, I would, if I had to choose between the things that are going on right now to really, fixate on and focus on, perhaps the, plans for ethnic cleansing and the utter destruction of the Gaza Strip and killing of some, 21,000 plus Palestinians in Gaza might be an important thing to raise with Netanyahu and get upset about as well. I also wanted to just show you this in the lane of fresh horrors that are being unleashed by this war. Apparently, we have a new super fungus in Gaza because of Israel's destruction of all of the sanitation infrastructure. A wounded IDF soldier died after infection by the super fungus during the Gaza ground operation. Soldier was seriously injured in the Strip. Some 10 soldiers believed to have contracted the same fungus. No confirmation from IDF. Doctors warn of dangerous battlefield infections. So, apparently this was a drug-resistant super fungus, and it's because the soil has been contaminated with sewage, with raw sewage, because all of the infrastructure has been destroyed in Gaza. At the same time, we have mainstream U.S. politicians who are now, just getting super comfortable with ethnic cleansing and arguing aggressively that this is the right approach for the day after in Gaza. Here is Nikki Haley saying that starving Palestinians should go to pro-Hamas countries. Let's take a listen.
Where should the Palestinians go?
Well, they should be going through the Rafah Gate and Egypt take them. But I've always said that, what you should have is they should go to pro-Hamas countries. Qatar, Iran, if you send them there, Turkey, those are pro-Hamas countries. That's where they should go.
But they're on the run for their lives, taking whatever they can, their kids in tow. They're not able to get into Egypt. How are you supposed to even make it to Qatar at this point?
Isn't that telling that Egypt won't take them? Why won't Egypt take them? Because they don't trust which ones are terrorists and which ones aren't. It's a sad state of affairs, but the reality of that evil is very clear in Arab countries too. Arab countries have very much always been cautious and know the threats that Iran can place. They don't want those terrorist proxies coming after them. Saudi Arabia felt the Houthis in that fight for Yemen. Egypt knows exactly what they can do. But instead of the world hitting on Israel, who was brought to her knees in the worst invasion since the Holocaust, why isn't everybody talking to Egypt? Why aren't they talking to Turkey? Why aren't they talking to Qatar? Why aren't they talking to Iran? Why aren't they doing something to help the Palestinians? If that's the case, why is it you come back to Israel and the U.S.? It's always the case. Everybody loves to help Israel when she's hit. But all of a sudden they're quick to beat up on Israel when she hits back. If that had happened to America, do you not think we would have hit back? But where are the friends of those pro-Hamas people? Where are the friends of Gaza? They should be the ones doing what they need to save them.
So why do we come back to the U.S.? Why do we come back to Israel? I don't know. Maybe it's because Israel's the one dropping 2,000-pound bunker-busting bombs on a civilian population in a manner that our own president describes as indiscriminate, even as he continues to ship whatever Israel needs to continue to engage in this indiscriminate bombing campaign. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why the focus on Israel. Oh, why doesn't Egypt want to take in all of these refugees who have been now forcibly displaced from their homes because of this bombing campaign? Oh, I don't know. Maybe they don't really want to participate in an ethnic cleansing that Netanyahu is now openly floating and pushing for, and clearly finding some support among mainstream U.S. politicians. Nikki Haley's supposed to be the moderate alternative to Trump. Remember, guys? And here she is saying, oh, yeah, that would be the humanitarian solution. I mean, that's the piece that always drives me completely insane is they frame this quote unquote voluntary migration. How voluntary is it when your home is bombed, everything has been destroyed, and there's nowhere left for you to return to? And your kids are sick and there's not enough food and it's a complete siege and you're starving and there's no water and there's no medicine. Oh yeah, voluntary migration. Why do we focus on Israel? Why do we focus on the US? Because we're the ones who are making this entire area unlivable and forcing people out and killing them on a daily basis. So we had covered before all of these reports that, it's clear at this point what Netanyahu's goal is: thin out the population, quote unquote. We've had all these reports. We had that report about it finding mainstream bipartisan support within the U.S., using U.S. aid dollars to push countries in the region to take in massive refugee populations. And Nikki Haley clearly down with that plan. And I've got one piece to add to that, which is a report from Trita Parsi highlighted this. And I just, this is one single source. This was in the New York Review of Books. A person here says that a Biden official reached out about studying the feasibility of building a tent city in the Sinai, which would be followed by a more permanent arrangement somewhere in the northern part of the peninsula. So there are some indications that U.S. officials looking to assist with this future ethnic cleansing plan. So again, something to watch very, very carefully, because it's quite clear what the Israelis want at the end of this situation. All right, guys, that's what I got for you today. I'll continue to watch and see if there are other updates that we need to bring, and we'll be back with a regular show on Tuesday. So if not before, I will certainly see you then.